What is at stake is more than one small country. It is a big idea, a new world order, where diverse nations are drawn together in common cause to achieve the universal aspirations of mankind: peace and security, freedom, and the rule of law. Such is a world worthy of our struggle and worthy of our children's future.
Throughout the history of humanity, we as individuals have suffered immensely at the hands of the big idea, the ambitions of a few over the lives of the many. What was the result of George Bush's big idea?
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me, and one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They've just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
The Iraq War has cost the US taxpayer over $1 trillion, killed over 1 million Iraqis and 4,500 US soldiers. The country is now in a worse state than it was under Saddam Hussein. The war in Libya cost the lives of over 15,000, with many left injured. 1/3 Libyans have been displaced, and 250,000 fled the country. To overthrow Gaddafi, it ultimately cost the US taxpayer around $1 billion.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died. Did it have anything to do with your visit? No, I'm sure it did.
The 20th century, a period which began relatively peacefully, was ultimately plagued by various forms of big ideas. Hitler had a big idea. Hitler's big idea was to unite the German people under a system of National Socialism, expecting every man, woman and child to sacrifice their lives, defending his dream of a master race and a greater Germania. The result of Hitler's big idea was a world war, the destruction of Germany along with much of Europe, together with the deaths of over 60 million people. Joseph Stalin had a big idea. Joseph Stalin's big idea was to continue the communist revolution which Lenin and the Bolsheviks began in 1917, based around Karl Marx's big idea, stripping private property rights and freedoms from all its citizens, a system where the state owned all means of production along with all natural resources. The result of Stalin's big idea directly resulted in the deaths of 20 million people, and indirectly the deaths of over 100 million. Pol Pot had a big idea: to reset the clock of Cambodian society to year 0, going back to an agricultural system where the peasant farmers would develop the foundations for the future Khmer society, and anyone who had any form of Western influence, intellect, or even the ability to read were deemed a threat and executed. The result of Pol Pot's big idea was the deaths of almost a quarter of the entire Cambodian population, a disaster which the country still hasn't recovered from. The list of disastrous big ideas is endless, culminating in the overall deaths of over 260 million people. This is known in academia as genocide, a process in which your government kills you. It is the #1 killer of unnatural deaths throughout the past 120 years. If you add military deaths to this figure, it is a staggering 350 million people murdered in this way. All big ideas are essentially flawed, as they undermine the diversity of nature, which underpinned their creation in the first place. The main problem with the one-size-fits-all globalization project, another big idea, is that if you don't like it, there is no alternative to escape to. The reason why good ships are built with bulkheads is to protect their overall integrity. If one part of the ship becomes compromised, with bulkheads the seawater is prevented from penetrating other areas of the ship. This is one of the main reasons why the concept of sovereign nations within a system of balanced power prevents any uncontrollable totalitarian regime from taking over the whole world. If all sovereign nations unite under a big idea, and those who control the big idea become corrupt, then the whole world will be compromised in the blink of an eye, and nothing will save the ship from going down. Most of us are familiar with the biblical story of the Tower of Babel, where a united human race, following the Great Flood, speaking a single language, built a city and a tower to reach heaven. Unhappy with this threat, God scattered these people throughout the world so they could no longer understand one another.
Now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, "Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth." But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. The Lord said, "If as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they planned to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language, so they will not understand each other." So the Lord scattered them from there over all the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth.
The recent spectacle of Britain taking over 3 years to leave the European Union epitomizes the ruthless power and hold big ideas have over those who ultimately pay for their creation.
To the road, a 47-year political experiment that the British, frankly, have never been very happy with. My mother and father signed up to a common market, not to a political union, not to flags, anthems, presidents, and now you even want your own army. For me, it's been 27 years of campaigning and over 20 years here in this Parliament. I'm not particularly happy with the agreement we're being asked to vote on tonight, but Boris has been remarkably bold in the last few months, and Ms von der Leyen, he's made it clear, he's promised us there'll be no level playing field. And on that basis, I wish him every success in the next round of negotiations, I really do. But the most significant point is this: what happens at 11 p.m. this Friday, the 31st of January 2020, marks the point of no return. Once we've left, we are never coming back, and the rest, frankly, is detail. We're going, we will be gone. And that should be the summit of my own political ambitions. I walked in here, as I've said before, you all thought it was terribly funny. You stopped laughing in 2016. But my view has changed of Europe since I joined. In 2005, I saw the constitution that had been drafted by Giscard and others. I saw it rejected by the French in a referendum. I saw it rejected by the Dutch in a referendum. And I saw you in these institutions ignore them, bring it back as the Lisbon Treaty and boast you could ram it through without there being referendums. Well, the Irish did have a vote and did say no and were forced to vote again. You're very good at making people vote again, but what we've proved is the British are too big to bully, thank goodness. So I became an outright opponent of the entire European project. I want Brexit to start a debate across the rest of Europe. What do we want from Europe? If we want trade, friendship, cooperation, reciprocity, we don't need a European Commission. We don't need a European Court. We don't need these institutions and all of this power. And I can promise you, both in UKIP and indeed in the Brexit Party, we love Europe. We just hate the European Union. It's as simple as that. So I'm hoping this begins the end of this project. It's a bad project. It isn't just undemocratic, it's anti-democratic, and it puts in that front row. It gives people power without accountability. People who cannot be held to account by the electorate, and that is an unacceptable structure. Indeed, there's an historic battle going on now across the West, in Europe, America and elsewhere. It is globalism against populism. And you may loathe populism, but I tell you a funny thing, it's becoming very popular. And it has great benefits. No more financial contributions, no more European Court of Justice, no more common fish.
The idea concerning multiculturalism is a lie. What they are trying to create is a monoculture, mixing already existing traditional peoples into a single global mixture, diluting genetics, tradition, and cultural heritage. We already have a multitude of cultures, free to trade and interact on a peaceful and social level. People of all colors, shapes, and sizes, speaking an endless variety of wonderful languages. What the globalists want is to mix thousands of years of cultural diversity into a big pot, where only a dull greyish abomination of obedient automatons will be produced, to service a corporatocracy owned by a handful of wealthy people, abundant in knowledge but lacking in wisdom. Most of us are fed up with big ideas. What we want is to be left alone to get on with our lives in peace, unmolested. What we want is small government, small legislation, small interference, small armies, small taxation, and small banks. So beware of those with big ideas.
What is at stake is more than one small country. It is a big idea, a new world order, where diverse nations are drawn together in common cause to achieve the universal aspirations of mankind: peace and security, freedom, and the rule of law. Such is a world worthy of our struggle and worthy of our children's future.